Welcome to the GRESB training program. This lesson will cover how to complete the Asset Assessment Management component using the GRESB assessment portal. We'll continue with the Asset Assessment Management component and describe its aspects and their scoring weightings. We recommend that you first complete the lesson Asset Assessment Management Component Part 1 before starting this lesson. We'll go through indicators aspect by aspect, providing guidance and examples of how to report on each indicator in the assessment portal. We'll also explain how materiality-based scoring applies to the management component. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to complete the management component of the infrastructure asset assessment. After this lesson, we recommend that you follow the lessons on the asset assessment performance component. We'll continue with the third aspect of the management component, reporting. Let's have a look at the indicator on ESG reporting. This indicator asks, does the entity disclose its ESG actions and/or performance? If yes is selected, a number of different disclosure methods or reporting types appear in the selection list. Participants can upload everything from an ESG section in their annual report, to a separately issued sustainability report, to an integrated report which is aligned with the International Integrated Reporting Council framework. Note that while participants can select multiple options, the same uploaded document cannot be used to support more than one answer option. For example, the evidence to support section and annual report cannot also be provided for the standalone sustainability report. Let's now look at an example of selecting section and annual report. When this option is selected, a number of additional fields appear. Select the fields that relate specifically to that disclosure method and be sure they are corroborated by the uploaded evidence. First, you will need to select the applicable reporting level of the disclosure method. If the scope of the reporting in the annual report discloses actions or performance that are in direct reference to or match the reporting entity can be selected. For example, an annual report that is solely applicable to the entity or which includes specific and detailed actions or performance of the entity in addition to other entities within the group of companies. Note that if the entity subject to that particular GRESB submission is in itself a group of entities, participants may select entity in this section. An example would be a listed company composed of multiple fully owned subsidiaries. So, if the GRESB submission is done at the consolidated level and the annual report covers the entire group of entities, you can conclude that the report is applicable to the entity reporting to GRESB, and then entity can be selected for this disclosure method. Investment manager or business unit should be selected if the scope of the reporting, like the annual report, includes the entity subject to the GRESB submission. For example, an annual report which does not include specific and detailed actions or performance of the entity itself, but rather only for the investment manager as an aggregate. Groups should be selected if the scope of the reporting in the annual report includes the entity subject to this GRESB submission, but, for example, does not have specific and detailed actions or performance of the entity itself, rather only for the larger group of companies as an aggregate. Next, you can select whether the section and annual report is aligned with a relevant reporting standard or guideline, such as GRI or PRI. The report must clearly and directly reference the reporting standard selected. If the report is not aligned, simply leave the selection on the text "Choose one." Lastly, you can select if the disclosure is third-party reviewed. If it is, you will select whether it was checked, verified, or assured. If the report is verified or assured, select the applicable standard from the drop-down menu. The formal assurance or verification statement must corroborate the scheme that is selected. It can be included within the report or provided as a separate evidence upload. Reporting year is one of the most important elements of RP1 and varies depending on the disclosure method selected. An integrated report must reference actions and/or performance from 2020, 2019, or 2018 for a company reporting on calendar year. The standalone sustainability report must reference actions and/or performance from the reporting year or the year prior. Consequently, disclosure referencing 2020 or 2019 is valid for a company reporting on calendar year. Section and annual report must refer to actions and/or performance from the reporting year. For example, an entity reporting on calendar year 2020, the annual report must cover the year January through December 2020. Disclosures published in 2021, referencing 2020 actions and/or performance, are also valid. An annual report relating to calendar year 2019 is not valid unless you explicitly note that the 2020 annual report has not yet been published. This can be done using the GRESB evidence cover page or the evidence open text box. Dedicated section on corporate website, as well as the disclosure methods section and entity reporting to investors and other, must reference 2020. All of the required elements of the evidence uploads and different disclosure methods are explained in detail in the Infrastructure Asset Reference Guide. We highly recommend familiarizing yourself with the requirements prior to completing this indicator and keeping the reference guide at hand while reporting. The next indicator covers incident monitoring. Select the stakeholders that the process requires communication with and describe the communication process. This indicator is automatically validated based on the stakeholders selected. Communicating with more stakeholders secures more points subject to a diminishing increase in scoring. See the validation and scoring lesson for more detail. The description of the communication process is not scored. The next indicator follows the last by asking to report on actual incident occurrences, the intent being to ensure the communication of significant incidents to the entity's investors. If one or more incidents have occurred during the reporting year, enter the total number of incident cases, the value of any fines and/or penalties, and the total number of currently pending investigations. This indicator is not scored but is of significant interest to investors. GRESB may use the information in this indicator as criteria for the recognition of sector leaders. The fourth aspect of the management component is risk management. The intent of this aspect is to assess the entity's understanding and mitigation of material ESG risks and opportunities. This indicator assesses the entity's use of management systems to manage environmental impacts, risks, and opportunities. The presence and application of an ESG-related management standard or comparable framework is an indicator of an entity's commitment to effectively action ESG issues. Select the applicable elements and provide supporting evidence. This indicator is subject to manual validation. For accreditation, evidence must include signed proof of the certification according to the standard. Points are gained for each management standard applied, with accreditation worth twice as much as alignment. The next three indicators cover the risk assessment in turn for environmental, social, and governance risks. First, select the elements of the risk assessment process undertaken by the entity. This section is worth 40% of the indicator points. Next, select all of the issues that the entity has addressed in a risk assessment. This needs to be supported by evidence. This indicator applies materiality-based scoring. This means that only the issues that are material to the entity need be addressed. Which issues are material is determined by the GRESB materiality assessment. For more information, see the lesson on materiality-based scoring. Only issues deemed of medium or high relevance count towards the score for this indicator. Issues of low or no relevance will not contribute to the score. In scoring, issues of high relevance are allocated double the weight of issues of medium relevance. To achieve full points, policies need to cover all of the material issues. The next 5 indicators in the risk management aspect are covered in the lesson on the resilience integration and are unscored. The next 3 indicators cover monitoring of environmental, social, and governance issues. The intent of these indicators is to assess the entity's use of a systematic process to collect data to monitor and assess governance performance. Like the indicators on policies and risk assessments, these indicators apply materiality-based scoring. Select all of the issues monitored by the entity. Again, materiality-based scoring means that only issues deemed of medium or high relevance count toward the score. To achieve full points, monitoring needs to cover all of the material issues. These indicators are automatically validated and evidence is not required. The final aspect of the management component is stakeholder engagement. Improving the sustainability performance of infrastructure assets requires dedicated resources, a commitment from senior management, and tools for measurement or management of resource consumption. It also requires the cooperation of other stakeholders, including employees and suppliers. This aspect identifies actions taken to engage with those stakeholders, as well as the nature of the engagement. The intent of the first indicator in this aspect is to assess the existence, scope, and reach of the entity's stakeholder engagement program. The first section covers the key elements of such a program. Select all which apply. This section is worth 60% of the indicator. Note whether the program aligns with third-party standards using the drop-down option. This is worth 20%. The third section covers which stakeholders the program applies to. Again, select all applicable stakeholders. This section is worth a further 20% of the indicator. This indicator is subject to automatic validation. The next stakeholder indicator covers supply chain engagement and has a similar structure to the last, but focuses on supply chain engagement and procurement processes. An entity's procurement decisions and activities can lead to significant negative sustainability impacts in the supply chain, so grievance mechanisms play an important role to provide access to remedy and reflect an entity's commitment to ESG management. The next indicator assesses whether there is a formal process for stakeholders to communicate grievances that apply to the entity. Similar to the previous two indicators, the first section covers the key characteristics of the grievance process. Select all which are applicable. The second section covers the stakeholders that the process applies to. Again, select the applicable stakeholders. Each section is allotted half the indicator point weighting. The final indicator in the stakeholder engagement aspect is on reporting of stakeholder grievances and how they have been resolved. Although this is not scored in the assessment, this is of significant interest to investors. Enter the number of grievances received. 0 may be entered, but only if there is a formal grievance mechanism in place as per the previous indicator and no grievances have been received during the reporting year. Provide a summary of the grievances and a summary of how they were resolved, if applicable. Thank you for taking the time to complete this lesson. We hope that it helped you get a better understanding of the GRESB Infrastructure Asset Assessment and prepared you to complete the assessment accurately. For any questions, you can contact us at gresb.com/contact.